What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at some NFC North news. We have some news for the Detroit Lions and also some more maybe dysfunction news for the Green Bay Packers. Things may be getting ugly over there, and I love it. But also, I want to take a look at Dan Campbell's time as the Miami Dolphins interim head coach, because I think you can learn a lot from his time as the head coach of Miami Dolphins, the way that he handled himself, the changes that he made, and that's what I wanted to discuss in today's video. So let's get it started.
We're going to bite a kneecap off, and we're going to stand up, and then it's going to take 2 more shots to knock us down. And on the way up, we're going to take your other kneecap, and we're going to get up, and then it's going to take 3 shots to get us down. And when we do, we're going to take another hunk out of you. Before long, we're going to be the last one standing.
Welcome everybody to a video. Glad you guys are here, and I'm excited for this one because I really want to talk about this Dan Campbell thing. I wasn't initially planning to do a video on this. I just wanted to have the background knowledge of what went down when he was coaching the Miami Dolphins, because first off, that experience on his own is very important. To have that background and can say, hey, I coached a team for 12 games. Not a lot of guys can do that when they're trying to get hired for a position. So I think that experience is huge for Dan Campbell. So we're going to talk about it and talk about how it went, what went down, what changes were made, the good, the bad. And I think you can learn a lot from that time and what he's probably going to bring to the Detroit Lions, what we've already seen happen so far this offseason in terms of players they brought in and players, well, that are no longer here. So that's what I want to take a look at. But before we get into any of that, I first got to go through some of this NFC North news. Let's start off with the Detroit Lions first. And this is that every single player the Lions have drafted is now currently under contract. Most recently, Iffy who has signed his rookie deal with the Detroit Lions, a third-round cornerback out of Syracuse. And man, this is just good news. I mean, you expect all of them to get their deals. Some take a little bit longer than others. But at this time, everybody has currently signed a contract with the Detroit Lions that was drafted this year. So that's good news. And Iffy is one of those guys that I really like. I like a lot of our draft picks. I mean, I really don't have any complaints here when you look at our draft. But Iffy is a dude I really like. When I went and watched his film right after we selected him, because I didn't pay too much attention before we drafted him, because I didn't honestly expect him to fall much past the beginning of the second round. But once we selected him there in the third round, I watched this film. I was like, dang, this dude can cover. He's long, he's fast, and you just like the upside there. And I'm really excited to see how he works with Aubrey Pleasant, because I do believe there's a lot of talent in this cornerback group and also in the secondary as well when you talk about the safety position, but specifically those cornerbacks. I also was thinking about doing a Jeff Okudah video today, but I kind of stayed away from that. But I may go back to it. I just stayed away from it for now. But man, there's a lot of talent in this cornerback group, also in the safety position as well, that if the Lions could just find somebody that could tap into it, bring the best out of them, man, we could be looking at some studs, some absolute studs. We've invested so much, but we got to find someone that can get it out of them. And finally, Aubrey Pleasant is that guy. I do have a video on that if you want to check it out. But we also have news on the Green Bay Packers, as things are just, they're kind of ugly there. And this is expected, I guess, because of the whole Aaron Rodgers situation with the front office not showing up to anything, saying that he won't basically show up to anything, him having problems with the front office, thinking that, you know, changes are going to have to be made if Aaron Rodgers comes back to play with the Packers this season. I discussed that, but now we have even more added onto this, and this comes with Davante Adams. Now, I wouldn't say this is directly with Aaron Rodgers because we don't know for sure it is, but when I read a little bit deeper into this, got some ideas, some thoughts, it sounds like it definitely could be. So apparently Davante Adams and the Green Bay Packers were in talks for months about potentially a contract extension, but recently this has been taken off the table. There are no plans to resume those talks anytime soon. So yes, he's still under contract right now. We're talking about a contract extension, long-term thoughts. We'll see, maybe they could pick back up. But right now, apparently they're in a bad place, according to Ian Rappaport. And when reading deeper, diving into this a little bit more, from what I can tell, this definitely could have something to do with Aaron Rodgers, because he doesn't know if he's going to be the quarterback there going forward. And I've also read on other articles before I read this news story that Aaron Rodgers was telling players, don't take a contract extension because I may not be here long term. I guess if you want to play with me. If you don't want to play with me, then you can take that contract extension. But Aaron Rodgers was warning players of that. Today on social media, I just saw these posts, so I wanted to throw this clip in here. Today on social media, both Davante Adams and Aaron Rodgers posted this picture. All right, now this kind of goes into what we talked about last time with the whole Jerry Krause situation, how Aaron Rodgers would mock their general manager as being Jerry Krause, breaking it up like he did in the last, or I guess he did in real life. But the Phil Jacksons and Jerry Krause, they had issues. That whole thing broke up after the 98 championship. So it doesn't necessarily say it's going to be the exact same, but it does kind of tell you maybe Davante Adams, a lot of this had to do with the whole Aaron Rodgers situation as well. Adams being on the final year of his deal. Yeah. things are getting kind of wild there in Green Bay, man. I'm telling you, Aaron Rodgers series. Vegas and online sports betting has a completely view on this entire situation as they're all getting prepared for a potential Aaron Rodgers retirement. They're taking off the betting odds for over-under NFC North playoff odds. They're taking it off for now because before training camp, a lot of these people believe that, first off, Vegas odds, sports betting, they're very sharp. They're very good with their knowledge. They're on top of this stuff, and they have direct knowledge that Aaron Rodgers could be preparing for retirement. Now, what I've read when I went deeper into this is that potentially Aaron Rodgers could retire before training camp, save the $2 million instead of just holding out of training camp. Now, he would owe back $11.5 million for a signing bonus, but there is a chance the Packers don't ask for that back. And then I guess he could come back in 2022, unretire, and of course he could go play somewhere else. It could be a little bit easier for him to make that happen because the Packers have said, we are not going to trade you. That could also mean Devontae Adams would just play his last year with the Green Bay Packers, assuming that they didn't trade him. I mean, they could trade him. If they knew Rodgers was retired, they could trade him away and get some draft capital. That may not be a terrible idea, but if they kept him around, he could play for one last season, and that could be it. That could be the way this ends, and I'm telling you, it is concerning when sportsbooks do this because they're usually on top of this stuff. So they have taken off the over-under odds. Their over-under odds for the Green Bay Packers were 9.5. They were favorites to win the NFC North, and they've taken that stuff off for now because they're preparing for that retirement. Of course, they got to change all those odds if it does happen. So, wow, I can't believe the situation got to this. Like, I felt like it would in a way because I just could not see a situation where Aaron Rodgers played with the Packers this year. I just couldn't see it. I was just like, based on what's going down, everything he's saying, it just does not seem like he's going to play with the Packers if something big changes. And now when you hear this, it's like, oh snap, this actually might be real. Like this might not be playing anymore. So we'll see, but we should get that news. If Aaron Rodgers does decide to surprisingly retire for this season, that news will come out pretty darn soon. So comment down below your prediction. See what happens. However, now I want to talk about some Dan Campbell. So DC was hired this offseason to be the Detroit Lions head coach. And man, I love the fact that he's been a head coach before. That experience with the Miami Dolphins, I think, is just vital. It's crucial. It's awesome. We needed it. We needed a guy that's been in those shoes because it is a transition. It's a process. And if the right people aren't around you, it can be even harder. If the organization is in a really bad spot, it can be really tough to step in, be a head coach, something that you've never done before. But now having that experience under his belt, plus being an assistant coach for years with Sean Payton, which I also think is going to benefit him because he got to learn from Sean Payton for multiple seasons because it was really only with the Dolphins after playing in the NFL for a while. But then getting to work with Sean Payton, I think was very beneficial because then he already had that perspective of being a head coach. He didn't end up getting the job back, and we'll get into all that, but now getting to sit back, learn from Sean Payton, a guy that's one of the best in the business at doing it year in and year out, consistency, understanding how he does things, and being like, oh, okay, I remember being in that spot. Now I see why he's doing that. So I think that experience is just super important on its own. What happened with the Miami Dolphins, you can really learn a lot about Dan Campbell and what Dan Campbell did, maybe some things that didn't go well, but things that did go well with the Miami Dolphins, what changes he made. And Dan Campbell was not afraid to make changes, but I think first off, the fact that he got hired was a very big deal. Just the fact that they decided to hire Dan Campbell as their interim head coach after they fired Joe Philbin after 4 games, I think that's a big deal. So they fired Joe 4 games in. They were 1-3. And there was, I wouldn't say there were high hopes like we're talking Super Bowl, but there was some thoughts that potentially this could be a team that could compete for the division. This could be a team that could make the playoffs because the next year with Adam Gase, they would go 10-6. They would make the playoffs. After that kind of fell apart. But there was some of those ideas that this could happen if things go right. And when you get up to 1-3, you're getting beat bad by teams. Well, the organization decided that they need to make a change because there was still early enough in the season that they could do that. They felt like there was enough talent on the roster, so they made the change. They went to Dan Campbell. In the words of Ross, who made this decision, he said he chose Campbell because Campbell was a good leader and he was a motivator. That's why he chose Dan Campbell to take this job over for the rest of the season, which was kind of like an interview. We just had this happen with Darrell Bevell. It wasn't as long. Campbell took over and changes were made immediately, all right? He did some big things in terms of just the way they handled themselves in practice to staff changes, and this is the kind of thing that I wanted to learn about. I know that he went 5-7. All right, if you didn't know, Dan Campbell went 5-7 in 2015 as Miami Dolphins head coach when he stepped in for those last 12 games. I know that, but I wanted to learn more, understand the ups, the downs, the changes that he came in and made. And that's exactly what I think I came across when I went through this. And I actually went back and watched some of these games. I got some clips from it, but I watched these games just to see how Campbell handled himself on the sideline. I think one thing that you noticed, and this is why it's so important that I mentioned before that you have some experience under your belt, being his first time as a head coach, was the first time that he was that guy on the sideline, there was a learning curve to it, because he even said in his own words that, all these guys that are becoming first-time head coaches can say all they want, but you don't really know what to be ready for. You don't really know what to expect until you've done it. He said, as simple as seating on planes, things like that. And you could see it in their first game. Their first game, they had their special teams coach help Dan Campbell with some of the situational management, and you could see they used a timeout in a spot that they probably didn't need to use the timeout. Campbell's even said, I'm able to learn from that, take from that. Then working with Sean Payton also helps. But when you're in that position, I think there's a lot of things that coaches overlook, and you could easily not really know is going to be part of the job. Ended up using a timeout to show that they were going to go for it on fourth down, but they didn't snap the ball. They just took the delay of game because they didn't get the defense to jump. So it was definitely a waste of a timeout because it was in the first quarter. There was no need to use it, but they did because there was some confusion with clock management, and that's why he had a guy helping him with it. But now having that experience, that's something that hopefully we don't see much of.
Rizzi, the head coaching assistant, ran to Dan Campbell right there in the headset and said, you got to take a timeout right here. Taking it at the 10-second mark, Campbell ran down the sidelines to get the timeout.
Campbell comes in, this team's getting, they're basically getting smacked. Let's be real. This team is struggling. And really, the entire philosophy of how this team was going changed under Dan Campbell. The vision for Dan Campbell and how this team would perform and how they would play the game completely changed. And it started off with practice. And even Dan Campbell said himself that the very first thing I'm going to change is the way that we practice. The first thing I'm going to change is the way that we practice. If you guys have not seen his introductory presser with Miami, I think it's definitely worth to watch because this is his first time being in this role. But he wanted to change the way that they had these players competing during the week. He said, if you're not out there, it's intense. You're going at it during practice. Wednesday, Thursday, potentially Friday in practice. You're not going to get your best on the field. You can't go and walk through during practice through the week. You can't have walk-through practices during the week and then go out there and play at a high level on Sunday. This isn't necessarily to say that it's like what Matt Patricia had them doing running hills. It's not to say that, I'm going to wear these guys out, because Dan Campbell, one of the biggest reasons that he was hired for this position at the time was because he had that experience. And when they asked him, why are you qualified for this role, he gave one of my favorite answers.
Pull the best out of people. I feel like everybody is different. No player is the same. No coach is the same. And so with that, there's different ways to motivate players. Some players, they need a kick in the rear. Some players need to be patted on the back. Some need to be challenged. They need to be told that they're not good enough, because that's when they really rise to the top.
He knew that he could get the best out of players. And it was one of my favorite answers. It's something that when we hired Dan Campbell and I watched it, and I was like, oh, wow, I like this dude. Because Dan Campbell was like, hey, look, some players, they need a kick in the rear end. Other players, they need a pat on the back. And some players, you got to challenge them. You got to tell them they're not good enough, because that'll bring the best out of them. He said no coach, no player, no staff member, none of these guys can be treated the same way, because they're all different people. You get the best out of them in different ways. And he understands that, being a player, being in their position. Everybody takes something different. And you also need to understand when to rest. Stop implementing the physical workouts on Saturday. I don't even know why that would be a thing, to have a physical workout the day before your game. That doesn't even make sense why that was a thing, but he stopped that. So someone said it best, he knew how to mash the accelerator but pump the brakes, when to do both. He also said that you didn't have to wear suits to away games anymore. It's just maybe one of those freedom things that he allowed those players to have. Hey, I'm not going to wipe your butt. You can wear whatever you want. Just don't show up naked. I don't care. It wasn't like Dan Campbell said, okay, we're not resting anymore. We're going to go crazy. It wasn't like that. We're going to go run hills. He just wanted a more intense practice that was very competitive. Said that we wanted to be more aggressive with our front four defensively and our offensive line. We got to be hitting people. And that's what he did. He implemented the practices where the first change came. And one of the biggest things, there were some videos kind of leaked about it, but he implemented the Oklahoma drill. If you don't know what this is, I've seen it two ways. I've seen the Oklahoma drill with and without blockers. So I don't know. I think there's two ways to run this. Blocker and the running back, or whoever has the ball, you both run at each other. There's two defenders. They're stacked on top of each other, right? I've seen that drill. I've also seen it where there's no lead blocker and there's only one defender, and you're both laying down I've been a part of this. You get it and you go, right? There's that Oklahoma drill. And it's something that he implemented. I'm sure there's own variations of it, maybe an offensive line versus a defensive lineman who can, I guess, bull rush each other back. There's probably different ways to do it. He said, hey, we might have to even pull some people apart sometimes, but that's what he wanted. He wanted that vibe.
In the week, they go after each other, whether it's practice squad versus defense, they're giving the look, or practice squad versus offense, but it gets heated, okay, and it's intense. And it's people that are fighting to win. All right, they want to get noticed, or they want to do their job. It's not just going through the motions. To me, that's what's got to change. And if we'll start there, I think we'll be in the right direction.
That, okay, we're going at it in practice. I want Mike Pouncey, our center. He may be our best center. I want someone going at him every play. I don't want him walking through every play. I want someone going at him trying to take his spot. That was the environment that he wanted to instill, and he did that. And actually, there was a scuffle. I don't know if it was his first practice, but it was very early in his tenure. There was a scuffle that had to be pulled apart. But that's something that Dan Campbell told us, hey, this might happen because this is the kind of practices that we're going to have. And let's just say it led to results. In their first 2 weeks, they smacked their opponents. Like, they weren't close, all right? They were not close. They went out, they won their first 2 games in great fashion. So they went from a team that was 1-3, getting beat by double digits 3 games in a row, to all of a sudden go out there just smacking back-to-back opponents. I mean, they dropped 41 points on the Texans in the first half. Now, they would only finish that game with 44, but they went out and they won by 18 points, okay? They played well. They came out with that fire, that energy. Ryan Tannehill did something spectacular. He had the most completions in a row. I believe in NFL history through a 2-game span, it was like 25 completions from the last game to the next game. He had like 18 straight in their next game before he threw an incomplete pass. He was on fire. They would win those back-to-back games before they would lose to New England Patriots, and they lost to New England pretty bad. It was 36-7, his 3rd game as a coach, and, they would find a little losing streak here. Like I said, they only went 5-7. So it wasn't like they won every game they played. I'm sure he would still be in Miami if that was the case. But, it was enough for legitimate consideration after the season. But New England handled their business. New England won their first 10 games that year, but they would respond. They would get back at New England in the last game of the season, okay? They would fight. And that's one thing that you can't question is that this team fought. Now, even though there were some talent on this team, they did have some bad luck, specifically with injuries. Cameron Wake went down with an injury. There was injury issues. However, what you could tell is just the way that they approached the game was completely different. And one thing that he did very early, aside from those practices, is they fired their defensive coordinator. Now, their defense was playing at a very low level, and there was a lot of issues. There was a whole bunch of culture issues. None of these players, according to the media, were not happy with this defensive scheme whatsoever. Picked up a little bit when Dan Campbell took over. There were issues defensively. I guess Sue showed up to one practice. He didn't wear shoes because he was in protest of the defense. And clearly that's an issue. All right. That's how players felt about defense. There was apparently behind doors, closed doors meetings with the defensive coordinator to kind of complain about the scheme that they're in. So it took Dan Campbell no time to come in and fire the defensive coordinator. Before they even played their first game, he fired the defensive coordinator just days in with that staff. And they gave Dan Campbell that ability to do that because they wanted to see Dan Campbell, right? When you give the guy the job 4 games in, you want to see, you're giving him a legitimate shot. You want to see his vision and you want him to act it out, not just be a part of the ride. You want him to say, okay, this ain't working. We got to cut ties here. You're making those big decisions now because it's your opportunity to be a head coach. So that experience is valuable. And up till that point, he was there since 2012. Things weren't going great for that defense. So it was just kind of something. He came in a couple of days, he fired him. It was during a bye week, so they had time to do that. They promoted their defensive backs coach, so they brought in a whole new defensive coordinator. And for Dan Campbell, he wanted to be more aggressive defensively, and I think you saw that. So they went to more one-gap approaches. They weren't necessarily read and react anymore like they were in the past, where Sue was, then it felt like he was in position, to make plays in the backfield. They went more one-gap. Unfortunately for them, Wake's injury was a very big loss, but there was still talent on the defensive line, and that's how they approached things. So we don't necessarily know that Dan Campbell was the guy that decided to go to one-gap, but we know that they did, and that was what Dan Campbell wanted to do philosophy-wise. He wanted to be more aggressive, and they brought in the guys to do that, but Todd Wash, he ran one gap, so if the Lions want to do that, they could definitely do it. Aubrey Pleasant and Rams said the Lions have the guys to do it now, but they have the coaches that have also done it. There were players coming out after years saying that it was just a vanilla defense, but they also kind of expected it to be like that because it was a change that they tried to make during the season, firing their defensive coordinator, and they were already having issues with the defensive coordinator coordinator. So when you do this during the season, it's kind of tough. Dan Campbell doesn't have that defensive background where it's like, hey, I'm going to call plays now. So he was just kind of relying on the defensive backs coach to do it. So it stayed vanilla. You know, Dan Campbell doesn't have that play calling background offensively or defensively. And defensively, there were some changes, but they promoted their defensive backs coach to defensive coordinator after they fired their defense coordinator. And this is why it's so important that he landed the strong staff he did, because he's not going to be a play caller for the Lions. He's going to let them do that. But there is a philosophy and a way that he wanted to attack the game. Defensively, he wanted that front four to be aggressive. And what did the Lions do this offseason? Well, they brought in Todd Wash, who put together Saxonville, who's going to be aggressive. Dom Capers, who started the zone blitz. And you have Aaron Glenn, who's part of a pretty aggressive Saints defense. A head coach for the Miami Dolphins during his introductory presser, he said the first thing that he want to do is focus on changing that culture, the way they structured practices, the way they held meetings, you know, the way they had the locker room set up. He changed those things. But the X's and O's, those weren't something that he necessarily had a background in. Now, he would be involved, but he wouldn't be the guy that was making those changes. So it's important that he had to surround himself with the Lions with those guys. And we'll get into that more in a second. But offensively, things changed as well. While defensively, he wanted to be more aggressive with the front four, offensively, he wanted to run the football. He wanted to establish the run game. And he always had that background of, hey, you know, you can control the clock. You can run the football. That's what he wanted to do offensively. He wanted to be able to run the football. And the first game that he took over as head coach, those changes were made. The changes were made the first time that he took over as head coach because they ran the ball a lot more that first week. Through the first 4 weeks of the season, while he was the tight ends coach, they were historically low in rushing the football. Less than anyone in the last 50 years through the first 4 weeks of that season. It was crazy how little they were on the ball. They came extremely one-dimensional. They just paid Ryan Tannehill, so they were playing off of Ryan Tannehill's arm, but they weren't even rushing the football. And that changed like crazy when Dan Campbell became the head coach. Now, the first week it changed a ton. We saw him rushing it first down, second down, third down. They were running the ball. They were establishing the run game.
Out of 52 third downs they've faced, they've only run it 5 times, and now they're running it on first, second, and third down.
And ultimately, Dan Campbell basically pulled the plug, and he fired Bill Lazor, who was the offense coordinator. And he said, look, he failed to establish a run game. So I think it was like 4 weeks left in the season they did this, failed to establish the run game. And after they fired their offensive coordinator, Dan Campbell said, I want a minimum of 25 rushing attempts this game. I think they had 26 for their running back. So they just hit that mark right before he got fired, which was against the Jets, where they had less than 10 carries as a team. Now, it wasn't that effective, but they only had less than 10 as a team, and it really put the game on Ryan Tannehill, and it led to some problems. And we didn't see this every game, but we did see it where it would happen, and they would kind of go away from the run game. And that kind of shows up as an issue as to how the team was built, from the staff, also the personnel you brought in, and how Dan Campbell viewed and his vision. When that worked, they could win some games, because you could see Ryan Tannehill could take care of the football, and they could beat some teams. Bill Lazor's never been a big run guy. I mean, even looking at when he was with Cincinnati, when he left and went to Cincinnati, he rarely ran the football. Getting more on the run game actually did help Ryan Tannehill. We're seeing that now with the Tennessee Titans, and just how important it is to have that kind of run game. Through the first 4 weeks of the season when Joe Philbin was there, they didn't score 20 points once. Now, this isn't to say that their offense just took off. You know, they still struggled, and a lot of that had to do with their offensive line was bad. Mike Pouncey ended up missing some time, but it was atrocious. I know PFF ranked it at 31, 32nd in run blocking. They had 45 sacks on Ryan Tannehill. It was a bad offensive line. And when that happens, you're going to have some problems running it or passing it. But you really got to keep it balanced, that's for sure. Because if you do one or the other and you just lean on that and you don't mix it up, you're going to have big problems offensively. So that was an issue for sure, especially when they would get into those modes of passing like 50 times. That was a big problem. Lamar Miller had 13 or more carries in a game. They were 6-1 that season, and they could easily been 7-0 if it wasn't for this messed up snap count, because they had the backup center in the game. They messed up the snap count. He snapped it. No one moved.
I don't even have to say anything.
And Ryan Tannehill ended up getting sacked. They had, the 3-4 plays from the 5-yard line to punch it in, but they had a chance to beat the Colts. They could have been 7-0 with 13 or more carries for Lamar Miller and finished those last 5 games at 3-2 on the year. Now, sure, yes, it was against a third-string quarterback, but you play who's in front of you. So they could have done it. Didn't make a difference when they made the offensive coordinator change, because they did get Lamar Miller more involved in those last 5 games. There was only one game where he didn't hit 13 rushing attempts, and that was 12 because they went down 23-0 to San Diego. They just had issues. Like I said, sometimes it wasn't always extremely effective, but now because Dan Campbell's in here, he's building the team. He can build it around this run game. Actually, interesting note, Miami did play out of the spread a lot, so a lot of their run plays were also out of the spread. May not be the exact same. It gets an opportunity to come in here, build this offense together, and focus on this run run game. And Anthony Lynn, he's the X's and O's guy. He understands how to run out of the spread. He understands those things that maybe they just didn't have. He knew what philosophy he wanted to go with, but they didn't really have the people there for exactly what Dan Campbell was trying to go for. And it was clear, because if he never became the head coach, if they never put him in charge, they probably would have ran that offense as it was going, which was run the ball way more than we passed the football. And we're going to lean on Ryan Tannehill. And that's why their first-round pick was Devontae Parker, because that was their offense. So it was just a completely different way to build a team versus how we go out, we take Penei Sewell. There were stars we could go with receiver, but no, we went with the offensive tackle out of Oregon. Good change. It was what Dan Campbell wanted to do. And we've seen it this offseason. This offseason, he goes in, he brings in defensive linemen. Michael Brockers, Levi, Aleem McNeil. He brings in those guys to help up front. But offensively, Penei Sewell, Jamal Williams, the only guy he gave a multi-year deal to aside from a guy that we re-signed. Jamal Williams, Penei Sewell, Jermar Jefferson. And then you go out and you hire Anthony Lynn. Dan Campbell was not going to come in here and be like, I'm going to be the offensive coordinator. I'm going to run the ball. Here's how we're going to do it. He's coming in understanding that that's what his philosophy is. So he had to get a guy that matched up with that. And that's what Anthony Lynn is. Anthony Lynn's a guy that has that run game coordinator background. With Buffalo, leading the league in rushing yards, 5.3 yards per carry. LaShawn McCoy, right? We all know what Anthony Lynn did. So he went out and hired that guy. Now, the issue with Miami was that he didn't get to hire his coordinators. He just promoted guys and they just said, hey, I want to run the football more. Okay. But the X's and O's, those weren't something that he was going to be able to affect or something that he was going to necessarily change directly. The idea, the vision, the overall plan for this team was to go a certain direction. And maybe if he got an opportunity to be a head coach after this, he could have went out and hired his own coordinators to follow that blueprint. But he wasn't able to do that back then because it was during the season, so they just kind of had to adjust on the fly. But the overall idea of how they attack things offensively did change. Another way they changed was the way they addressed the quarterback position with Ryan Tannehill. While yes, his passing attempts did go down because they ran the ball a lot more, so was the way that they wanted to get Ryan Tannehill involved offensively. Very similar to the way they're getting Jared Goff involved. Dan Campbell wanted Ryan Tannehill to be more involved in the game plan heading into the week. Said that they would have Ryan Tannehill come in on Mondays, so early in the week, and discuss the game plan. To get him more involved in the game plan. And Ryan Tannehill expressed, obviously, how he liked this. Another thing that was an issue with their offensive coordinator with Bill Lazor is apparently he wasn't making adjustments at the line. This was all things. It was whatever the play was called, that's what they went with. So it wasn't like they were giving Ryan Tannehill that kind of freedom. And that's something that Dan Campbell wanted to give. And you can see that with Jared Goff here. Jared Goff's involved in, hey, what do you like to do offensively? Dolphins not allowing Ryan Tannehill pre-snap to make adjustments, change calls based on what he sees in the defense. He can't exploit the defense's weaknesses that he can see on the field because they just run whatever the coach called. 15 seconds left on the play clock. The coach and the quarterback, they can't have those conversations. The communication's cut off. So I'm hoping for the Detroit Lions we see a similar thing that Dan Campbell did when he was there with Ryan Tannehill. We see a similar thing with Jared Goff. We've clearly seen that they've put the trust in Jared Goff. They didn't go out and draft a quarterback. They're getting him involved in the game plan. So everything so far says that will be the case. And I hope they give him that kind of freedom on the field as well to bring that confidence out of him, to trust him. Is he going to make some mistakes? Yeah, he will. But I also don't want to be in the boat of we're micromanaging the guy, okay? Because he's never going to develop. We heard back at Cal that by his final year, he was running the offense. And I hope that's the case. Now, I'm thinking that part of that could have been that with the Rams, it was a completely different scheme. It was McVay's scheme, and he had a way that he ran it. So for McVay, he would help him with projections. He would help him till that 15 seconds, and then McVay would just snap it, right? He wasn't the guy that was making the changes. That's what we're told. But I'm hoping going to a scheme that he likes, that he's comfortable in, being a part of, hey, what do I like to do? What are our audibles? What do we switch to when we see certain looks? Because now he's got a say in that. It's not just this is McVay's scheme and I'm a part of it. I'm the quarterback in his scheme. It's now, hey, this is what I was part of putting this together. He'll understand it a little bit deeper, and they can trust him to go out there and make those adjustments. They can trust him to lead the team as a quarterback. Be smart. Make smart decisions. Smart decisions is more than just simply throwing the football. It's making smart decisions on the field. It doesn't mean we're going to ask Jared Goff to throw the ball every play on a possession, because I don't think that's what you want to do. But for him to make those decisions, emphasis is going to be on the run game, right? And then you're going to play off that. You're going to make smart decisions. It's going to open up those explosive passing plays that Jared Goff hasn't had since they had a top run game in LA, or going back to Cal when they had a top run game in his final year. And for people that don't think, Jared Goff can throw the long ball. He can absolutely throw the long ball. He was one of the top deep ball passers early in his career with the Rams. At Cal, one of the top deep ball passers coming out of the draft. But that went away when the run game became less effective. And he hit that right on the head. He hit that nail on the head, because they finished that season averaging 4.3 yards per carry, which was tied for 9th. 12th in expected points per run. Okay, so their run game did become more effective. It went up. because they had 62 rushing attempts through the first 4 weeks of the season. All this change, how did that affect Ryan Tannehill? That would be the question. Okay, did it work better when they were doing it their way through the first 4 weeks? Was Ryan Tannehill playing at a higher level? Or did he play at a higher level when Dan Campbell became the guy? Dan Campbell started calling things how he wanted to do things offensively. He wasn't directly affecting the X's and O's, but he was kind of dictating the style of how he wanted the offense to look. Things improved with Ryan Tannehill when Dan Campbell took over as head coach, being involved, having more freedom, and they improved big time. Before that, through the first 5 games, he had 7 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, completing 56.7% of his passes, 6.3 yards per attempt, which is really low, and also a 78.5 pass rating, which is very low. Low yards per attempt because there was no run game to open up the pass. It was just pass the football a majority of the time. But when Dan Campbell took over, these numbers changed like crazy. Now, while the pace for touchdowns from 28 went down to 24, interceptions went down. He only finished the season with 12 interceptions, which means that he only had 7 interceptions through the last, 12 weeks of the season. So that went down big time. His yards per attempt went up to 7.2 to end the season. His completion percentage went up to nearly 62%, and his pass rating jumped up to 88.7. So pretty much everywhere across the board, statistically, he improved. But when you look at directly just that time with Dan Campbell, those 12 games, his pass rating was a 93.9. That's his highest pass rating he's posted outside of Tennessee, 93.9. Now, Tennessee is the perfect situation for Tannehill. So he was right on in what it would take for Tannehill to play at the highest level, because for Tannehill, where Tannehill's played his best is with Tennessee, where they have a top rushing game. It's a perfect fit for him. And it makes sense when you look at what Dan Campbell has done offensively. The focus on the run game, allowing Jared Goff to be involved in the game plan, bringing in receivers like Tyrell Williams, like Rashad Perriman for those explosive plays. Because the explosive plays do come when you can set it up by play action. When you can run the football, those explosive plays get opened up. It works so well with Tennessee. They have the explosive receivers. They have a run game. The Lions are building kind of their own little version of that. A different way, yes, in the vision of Anthony Lynn, who's done this before at a high level. But it's the idea. It's kind of the style of how he wants to run things as a team. Ryan Tannehill's pass rating was the highest we've ever seen outside of Tennessee. He also had the highest yards per attempt through those 12 games at 7.8. That's the highest we've seen outside of Tennessee. So yes, his stats did improve. The guy was on pace for 684 passing attempts that season. That would have been far and away the most in the NFL. He finished that season at 586, which was about 100 less. Think about that, and that was still top 10 in the league. He was on pace for almost 700 passing attempts if they would have stayed on the trajectory they were going. Lynn wasn't going to be an offensive coordinator this year. He was going to take the year off. But he decided to join Dan Campbell because Dan Campbell, he said, I knew they were going to build something special here. He was going to take the year off. He, by rumor, reportedly turned down to go work with Seattle and Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson for 2021 because he told them he was going to take that year off. But when the Lions called, when Dan Campbell called, he said, I knew things were going to be special. He didn't show us that the X's and O's were going to be perfect because they weren't. And the players acknowledged that they weren't perfect. But you can't really do that because that wasn't his background. You fired the coordinators during the season. So all you could really do was change kind of how you did things. But you couldn't really change the X's and O's directly. That was on them. And Campbell didn't have the background to do that. So this offseason, getting to pick his coaching staff before the year, which probably we would have seen if he would have stuck with Miami, is that things can be much different now. Because now he gets to bring in those guys that bring in the same philosophies, the same Bill Parcells background in Anthony Lynn, the defensive minds to run the defense, while he can manage the team. And his overall philosophy will be the same as those guys and how they want to do things. CBS Sports, and they were ranking their coaches for the season, they said Butt never coordinated an offense. Like, that's some kind of slight against him because he's never coordinated an offense. All right, I've seen this all the time. This is something against him that he's never been a coordinator before. But when I dug a little bit deeper into this, just because I wanted to see how many coaches have done this and been successful. And I know these aren't all the examples, but just how many guys have done this? Never coordinated, hired their coaches around him, and they were successful. I was surprised at how many names I didn't know had the same background. All right, let me give you some examples. All right, let's start off at the college level. Let me give you some college level examples. PJ Fleck with Minnesota, right? He had them ranked number 10 in 2019 to finish the year, 10-2 that season. He pretty much put Minnesota on the map, the Golden Gophers, okay? PJ Fleck, never coordinated before. LSU's coach, I don't know exactly how to say this guy's last name. Dabo Swinney. The thing that I noticed with a lot of these guys is that they were either interim head coaches, which Dan Campbell was to get that experience. Dabo Swinney was an interim head coach for Clemson. Actually, Dabo Swinney was a wide receiver coach that became their head coach because the ownership said that he could lead. He knew he was a leader. So they let him become the head coach. And they hired the coordinators around him to coordinate. but he's never been a coordinator. He was just a wide receiver coach at that time. But a lot of these guys have either been assistant coaches, which Dan Campbell also has been with New Orleans, working side by side with Sean Payton, or they've been interim head coaches. Either that's taking over where they were, and that's, you know, how they've had their success, or it's taking over elsewhere by having that experience. A lot of these guys have that same kind of background that Dan Campbell does. Campbell actually has a lot of experience when you talk about being not only an assistant coach with Sean Payton for multiple years, but also having that experience of directly being a head coach for 12 games is a big deal. Level. John Harbaugh. Harbaugh was a special teams coach. He was a defensive backs coach, a tight ends coach, just like Dan Campbell. Never coordinated before. Andy Reid. This one shocked me. I thought Andy Reid for sure was a coordinator. Nope. Andy Reid was not a coordinator. Andy Reid was a quarterbacks coach. He was an assistant head coach. And now we know what he's done in the NFL. Andy Reid. Mike Tomlin. Now, Mike Tomlin was a coordinator for 1 year. For 1 year, and it was a terrible year. So he technically has had that experience. But Mike Tomlin, same kind of thing going on there. There's a couple of things that I noticed with a lot of these coaches when I look back on their history and their first time becoming a head coach. The first thing I noticed is that it is really all about that coaching staff. And what you notice is when these guys were able to come in, be successful, non-coordinators, it was because they had a really strong coaching staff they put around him. For example, Andy Reid, he had 7 NFL coaches on his coaching staff. They would become NFL coaches later on. 7, including John Harbaugh. All right, Andy Reid had an awesome staff in 1999 back with the Philadelphia Eagles. How about John Harbaugh? John Harbaugh himself, he had a really strong staff, specifically with his 2 coordinators. The defensive coordinator was Rex Ryan. He was interviewing for head coaching jobs. They were able to keep him around. They promoted him to the assistant coach as well. And Cam Cameron, who was an offensive coordinator, and apparently he was a very highly sought-after offensive coordinator that the Ravens were able to keep around. Mike Tomlin, back in 2007, who went from 8-8 to 10-6, had offensive coordinator Bruce Arians. Yeah, that's a pretty big one. And defensive coordinator was Dick LeBeau. So even though he was a DC for 1 year, Dick LeBeau was his defensive coordinator. John Harbaugh probably had the biggest turnaround. He went from 5-11 to 11-5. But pretty much everybody I've seen successful. Mike Tomlin 10-6. Jim Harbaugh's first year 7-4 with San Diego. Urban Meyer's first year with Bowling Green 8-3, one of the biggest turnarounds. I mean, a lot of these guys had success right away. With the Ravens, before John Harbaugh came in, their coach before went 5-11. He didn't have an offensive coordinator because he was taking those responsibilities. John Harbaugh comes in, they go 11-5, but I mean, he went through it. He hires 2 well sought after coordinators, right? Rex Ryan stays there, but they bring in the offensive coordinator, and they went through it. They had quarterback injuries, which forced Joe Flacco, who was the 18th pick in the draft, to start. Over-under for the season was set at 6. That's what people were looking at, 6. That was their over-under. They would go on to win 11 games. I'm pretty sure our over-under is set at 5. If we could have that kind of turnaround, that would be pretty darn awesome. Urban Meyer just got hired in the NFL. Urban Meyer was never a coordinator. They say Urban Meyer just kind of runs it like a business. From, Florida to Utah, Bowling Green, Ohio State, obviously, 83-9. Never was a coordinator. Jim Harbaugh, he's had success at both levels. College, ton of success. Stanford, Michigan obviously hasn't went great there. We'll see how that goes. He started off well, but we'll see how it goes. But in the NFL, San Francisco, a team that was supposed to be rebuilding, takes him over. They're a playoff team. They're in the Super Bowl. He's playing his brother in the Super Bowl, right? 13-3, 11-4-1, 12-4. His worst season was 8-8. That ended because of a bad relationship between him and the front office. That shouldn't be the case here because Brad Holmes, Dan Campbell, what did the Lions say? We need to make sure these guys work together well. But what they really should focus on is the staff. Everybody has praised the staff we put together. But for some reason, they look at it as a slight like he hasn't coordinated. But what Dan Campbell understands is what he doesn't know. He knows that he can't coordinate. He's not coming in here saying, I'm going to try to coordinate an offense this year. No, I'm going to go get the guy that follows the same belief I have, but can do his job, and I'm going to let him run that. I'll lead. I'll be the leader of men here. I'll pull it together. I saw an interesting quote, and it said this. It takes a different skill set to run a company than it does to design plays. It may not have worked out perfectly in Miami because they didn't have those guys once they fired him. He did have an idea of how he wanted to do things. Now he gets an opportunity to bring in the staff. And people credit the staff all the time, but for some reason they look at it as a slight. Why don't we look at what Dan Campbell has done in terms of bringing the staff? For example, I wouldn't want to judge Anthony Lynn as a head coach. Lynn wasn't a great head coach. He had a winning record, but he wasn't a great head coach. So I don't know how he's going to do as an offensive coordinator. That's not the same thing. That's not at all the same thing. Anthony Lynn's been there, done that. Maybe it wasn't the best. Okay, cool, you tried, but that wasn't the best. However, you can coordinate, and we've seen that. Some of these media sites are really judging Dan Campbell for a job that he doesn't have. All right, Dan Campbell's not here to be a coordinator. I would understand if you were concerned, like, how's Campbell going to fare as that coordinator? I get it because he hasn't done it. I would be concerned too. But I know he's not. I'd be concerned if Campbell told us, hey, I'm calling plays this year. I'd be like, oh, snap, I don't know if that's going to work. That would be concerning. I get it. Players liked him a lot. And then he got to work for years with Sean Payton. What he has experience of is being a head coach, assisting a head coach. And when he did it, he brought the best out of his players. They believed in him. They bought in. They went out. They beat the Patriots the second time around. The Patriots were playing for the 1 seed in the AFC, and he beat them 20-10 that game. They wanted to play fast. They wanted to play at a high level. Brady played. They didn't sit out their starters, but they got beat. They got beat by Dan Campbell. Dan freaking Campbell. You can learn a lot from his time with Miami. There's a lot that we go into here. But the biggest takeaways for me, the philosophy, something that he's already bringing to Detroit. You can see it with the hirings that he's made, with the players that he's brought in. The philosophy, wanting to run the football, not asking his quarterback to win games, but instead make smart decisions. That's his background. That's how he's going to do things in Detroit. So expect it. Expect us to run the ball a lot. This is what's going to happen. It's as simple as that. Bring the best out of Tannehill. It worked for Tannehill. We've seen it now with Tennessee. They probably learned from Dan Campbell, like, oh, hold up. When he has a run game, that guy's really good. Let's try that. It's the same thing with every quarterback. When they have a run game, they're really good. Really good. When Goff had a run game, he was really good. No one's questioning Goff. But then the run game goes away, and snap, we're questioning him. Now, are things going to look the same as they did with LA? No. Guys wanted him back. Tannehill said after the season, the players like him. The guys like him. Players said, I would run through a wall for that guy. We would have ran through a wall for him. He has the support of the locker room. But when the Dolphins decided, yeah, we're not going to bring you back, we're going to go get Adam Gase because he finished second in interviews, which was a long interview process, he asked out of that contract because Dan Campbell wasn't going to sit there and go back to his job. And I'm glad he didn't, because he may not be where he is today as our head coach. He could still be there as that tight ends coach. He said, I'm moving on. I'm going to go try to get a head coach job. He didn't get one, but ultimately his chance would come, and it would. And here it is with the Detroit Lions. The fact that he got promoted, brought the best out of Tannehill, revitalized that run game. Still 5-7 isn't bad. And now here he is, got to put together a staff, got to build this team. He understands what he wants. And that's why I'm excited to see what Dan Campbell can do. So let me know your thoughts, Constable. I think there's some big things you could take away from this. But overall, players like him. They bought in. So it's not will they buy into his leadership style, which Louis Riddick says. We've already seen they will buy into his coaching style. Let me know your thoughts, Constable. Thank you for watching, and I'm out.